I'm going to rewind that little bit tomorrow for tomorrow's intro. That's one of my favorite melodies ever, written by Baruch Chait as part of Moshe Storch's Hallel back on Hoshana Rabbah. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Sunday. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house learning with us? Sharon in New Jersey, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Melissa in Great Neck, Nancy, North Carolina, Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Randy in Florida, John in Maine, Karen in Northern California, Marjorie in Virginia. Today's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by our very own Franco Zanini, who I guess will be tuning in later from Italy. Who says we are as much afraid in the light as children in the dark. And he's quoting Lucius Annaeus Seneca, the Roman Stoic philosopher, almost 2,000 years ago. Says Franco, thanks, Salanina, for showing us how to defy the darkness and enjoy the light of knowledge. So sweet. Thank you, Franco. Thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. May you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say amen. Big daf, big daf, Yud Zayin. Our page is 17 here in Tractate Bava Kamma, the 21st volume of the Talmud. Mishna number 5 in chapter 1 we're opening today, and God willing we will finish it, and with it complete chapter 1 and open chapter 2. Mishnah number 5. What is the difference between the liability incurred for damage caused by an ox that is considered innocuous, Tom? What is the difference between it and the liability incurred for damage caused by an ox that is forewarned, muad? We've seen this concept over and over again, haven't we? The Tom, when it gores another ox or a person, the owner is liable for half the damages, and it's taken out of the value of the goring ox. Whereas an ox that has gored on 2 previous occasions and the owner was warned and it gores again, hey, it was foreseeable, you've got a dangerous animal. And so this time, the owner pays the full value of the damages, and the injured party has recourse to the superior quality land of the owner of the ox in order to recover the damages. But says the Mishnah, that's how, right? That's what we remember. That's what we've learned. So what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says the only differences are that for damage caused by an innocuous ox, the owner pays half the cost of the damage exclusively from proceeds of the sale of the body of the ox. And for a forewarned ox, he pays the full cost of the damage from his higher property. What we thought. So that was the Mishnah. Here's the Gemara. What does the Mishnah mean by saying he pays from his higher aliyah property? Rabbi Lazar says it means that he pays with the superior quality ba'me'ula items of his property, right? That the best of his property is going to be available. So if it's real property that we're talking about, his superior quality land. And similarly, the fact that the word aliyah, right, same word aliyah, like when somebody's called to the Torah, or when someone makes aliyah, he moves to Israel, he's ascending in spiritual level. And similarly, the fact that the word aliyah is referring to superior quality property is indicated by the verse that states from 2 Chronicles 32:33, and Hezekiah, or in English you say Hezekiah, lay with his ancestors, and they buried him in the best, bema'aleh, of the sepulchres of the descendants of David. And Rabbi Lazar says the term b'ma'ale means beside the best of the family. And who are they? David and Solomon. So the Gemara offers an interpretation of another verse about the burial of a king of Judea, namely King Asa. Asa? How does that... Anyway, King Asa. And they buried him in his own sepulchres, which he had hewn out for himself in the city of David, and laid him in the resting place, which was filled with perfumes and spices, zenim, prepared by the perfumer's art. 2 Chronicles 16:14. So what is meant by perfumes and spices? Rabbi Lazar says it means many different types, zineh, of perfumes. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says the word zenim sounds similar to the word zenut, licentiousness, same word as tzona, right? A woman of ill repute, so we say, and should therefore be understood about types of perfumes that anyone who smells them is led to licentiousness. That's dangerous perfume. Now the Gemara cites another dispute between Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani. Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, requested of God to punish those who hounded him. So in Jeremiah 18:22, for they have dug a pit to trap me, and they have set snares for my feet. In what way did they dig a pit to trap the prophet? Rabbi Lazar says they cast suspicion upon him of engaging in intercourse with a woman who had engaged in sexual intercourse with a man who was forbidden to her by the Torah, which made her a zona. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says they cast suspicion upon him of engaging in intercourse with a married woman. At any rate, they spread slander about the prophet, since he certainly didn't engage in those behaviors. So the Gemara asks, granted, according to the one who says that they cast suspicion upon him of engaging in intercourse with a zona, this is because the word pit is used as a metaphor for a zona. Where do we see this? Proverbs 23:27, as it is written, for a zona is a deep pit, right? In other words, a woman, a prostitute, a seductive woman who's going to lead you to sin is akin to a deep pit. But according to the one who says that they cast suspicion upon him of engaging in intercourse with a married woman, for what reason did Jeremiah use the word pit? And the Gemara answers, due to the fact that she is a married woman. Should she be excluded from the category of a zona? If she commits adultery, she is also termed a zona. And the term pit can justifiably be applied to her. And the Gemara asks, granted, according to the one who says that they cast suspicion upon him of engaging in intercourse with a married woman, this is consistent with that which is written. You, Lord, know all their plans to kill me, says Jeremiah in Jeremiah 18:23. By claiming he engaged in intercourse with a married woman, the slanderers implicated him in a prohibition punishable by the death penalty. But according to the one who says that they suspected him of engaging in intercourse with a zona, what did he mean by saying to kill me? I mean, after all, if you engage in sex, extramarital sex with a prostitute, it's a big transgression, but it's not a death penalty offense. So the Gemara answers Jeremiah was referring to the fact that they cast him into a pit of mire, M-I-R-E. And about this it says, as described in Jeremiah chapter 38, Jeremiah prophesied that those who stayed in the city would die of hunger and pestilence, while those who submitted to the Chaldeans would survive. Jeremiah's words angered some officials among the people who saw them as treasonous, and they threw him into a pit. Jeremiah nearly drowned in the mire and was saved by the intervention of a Nubian slave of the king, who pleaded with the king to save Jeremiah and brought 30 people to help drag him out of the mire. Sounds like quicksand. So Rava interpreted a verse homiletically. What is the meaning of that which is written? Let them be made to stumble before you. Deal with them in the time of your anger. Jeremiah 18:23. It means that Jeremiah said before the Holy One, blessed be He, Master of the universe, even at a time when they try to perform acts of charity, make them stumble by ensuring that they do so with people who are unworthy of charity, in order that they should not receive the reward for helping them. It's an interesting prayer. Right? And what's he saying? He says these people that have been so vicious, so later when they try to atone for their viciousness, they should fail. They should fail in their atonement. Let it not be forgotten what they did. Interesting prayer. The Gemara above cited a verse concerning King Hezekiah's burial. And the Gemara cites the continuation of that verse. And they afforded him honor in his death. And this teaches that they established a yeshiva at his grave to study Torah there, at the grave of King Hezekiah. So Rabbi Nassan and the rabbis disagree with regard to this yeshiva. One said they studied there for 3 days, and the other one said they studied there for 7 days. And some say that they studied there for 30 days. Now we're actually on 17a. And the sages taught a brisa that offers another interpretation of the verse cited, and afforded him, law, honor in his death. 2 Chronicles 32:33. So this is referring to the honor given to Hezekiah, the king of Judea, that at his burial, 36,000 men with bared shoulders went out before him. They removed their robes from their shoulders as a sign of mourning. And the number 36,000 is alluded to by the numerical value of the word law, which is 36. And this is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Nehemiah said to him, but didn't they also do this before Ahab? Apparently, if they did this before the wicked king Ahab, it is an honor shown to all kings. And it was not a unique show of honor for the righteous Hezekiah. So, rather, the honor that was done for Hezekiah was that they laid a Torah scroll upon his bier, B-I-E-R, and they said, this one, i.e. Hezekiah, fulfilled that which is written in this, i.e. in the Torah scroll, meaning he was righteous and he fulfilled all the commandments in the Torah. And the Gemara asks, but nowadays as well, we do this for any great Torah scholar that dies. So what is unique about what was done to honor Hezekiah? And the Gemara answers, well, nowadays we take out a Torah scroll, but we do not lay it on the bier of the deceased. And if you wish, say instead that nowadays we also lay a Torah scroll on the bier of the deceased, but we do not say this one fulfilled all that was written in this. So Rabbi Bar Chana said, I was once walking together with Rabbi Yochanan to ask him about this statement. Now, whenever he would enter a lavatory, upon his exit, I would ask him to explain a matter, and he would not answer us until he had washed his hands and donned his tefillin, right, which back then they wore all the time, and made the blessing over going to the bathroom, I assume, and only then would he answer us. So with regard to the honor given to King Hezekiah, he said, nowadays we even say this one fulfilled that which is written in this, but we do not say he taught that which is written in this, which was a unique honor performed at the burial of the righteous King Hezekiah. And the Gemara asks, but didn't the master say Torah study is great because the study of Torah leads to one's performance of the mitzvahs, the commandments. And this indicates that the performance of the mitzvahs is considered of greater value than Torah study. This is not the law, but if so, once Hezekiah had been praised with the fact that he fulfilled the mitzvahs of the Torah, why mention that he also studied it? And the Gemara explains this is not difficult. This statement of the master is about studying the Torah for one's own knowledge. And that unique praise given to King Hezekiah was about teaching the Torah to others. What is the actual halacha, the law about this? The study of Torah is valued even more than the performance of other mitzvahs, because the performance of mitzvahs does not necessarily lead one to study Torah. But the study of Torah does lead to performing mitzvahs. Therefore, if one has a choice of either studying Torah or engaging in the performance of some other mitzvah, if the mitzvah can be fulfilled by someone else, he should not cease his study. If the mitzvah cannot be performed by someone else, he should perform the mitzvah first and then return to his study. But the basic concept is studying Torah is greater because it contains everything. If you study Torah, you'll come to perform the mitzvahs. If you study Torah, you'll come to understand what the mitzvahs are so that you can perform them properly. If you study Torah, you'll come to desire to live a righteous life filled with mitzvah and greater study and always elevating yourself spiritually higher and higher. A verse that was cited at the beginning of this chapter, right, the Mishna on 2b, a verse that was cited at the beginning in the Gemara on page 2b, as part of a halakhic exposition, is now explained homiletically. Right? We started the chapter with this and we're going to finish with it. So Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, what is the meaning of that which is written, happy are you that sow, S-O-W, beside all waters, that send forth the feet of the ox and the donkey. So and that's Isaiah 32:20. And it teaches that whoever engages in the study of Torah and in the performance of acts of kindness merits reward equal to the portion of 2 tribes, right? A reward in the world to come for you as an individual equal to the reward received by 2 entire tribes of Israel. How is this possible? First of all, which 2 tribes? Joseph and Issachar. So if we're saying Joseph, that's so then it's 3 tribes, right? Because we look at Joseph's descendants, Ephraim and Manasseh, who each had their own tribes, right? They were elevated to the level of tribes with possession in the Holy Land. And the Gemara explains how this is derived from the verse, as it is stated, happy are you that sow. And the reference to sowing, right? Sowing, planting. The reference to sowing refers only to acts of charity. As it is stated, sow for yourselves for charity, reap according to kindness, Hosea 10:12. And the reference to water refers only to the study of Torah. Torah is often compared to water. Here, as it is stated with regard to Torah's study, Isaiah 55:1, ho, all who are thirsty go to water. And the fact that he merits reward equal to the portion of 2 tribes, this is derived as follows. The reference to the ox in the verse is an allusion to Joseph, who is described as an ox, Deuteronomy 33:17, right? Moses' blessings to the tribes as his death was approaching. And one's reward is that he merits to receive a canopy of honor, as did Joseph. As it is written, Joseph is a fruitful vine by a fountain. Its branches run over the wall. The branches over the wall in this verse allude to the canopy, and the reference to the donkey is an allusion to the fact that he merits to receive the portion of Issachar, who is described as a donkey, as it is stated when Jacob was blessing his sons directly. Issachar is a large-boned donkey. And there are those who say that the comparison should be understood in a different manner. His enemies will fall before him, just like in the blessing given by Moses to the tribe of Joseph, as it is written in the blessing bestowed by Moses to the tribe of Joseph, his horns are the horns of the wild ox. With them he shall gore the nations, even to the ends of the earth, Deuteronomy 33:17, and he merits the understanding of Issachar, as it is written, and of the children of Issachar, men that had understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do. And with that, we complete chapter 1 here in Tractate Bava Kamma. Now we start chapter 2, which in many respects is a continuation of the same issues we've been discussing in chapter 1. So here's Mishnah number 1 of chapter 2. The Mishnah in the previous chapter on page 15b teaches that the owner of an animal is always forewarned, right? He's on notice. He's going to have to pay full damages because it's unlike the innocuous ox with respect to goring. But the owner of an animal is always forewarned with regard to the category of trampling, right? If an ox is walking in its normal manner, it's not going to notice what it walks over. And if it does that, trampling or eating, as we've learned, on the property of another person, the owner of the ox that does the trampling or eating is going to be liable to pay the full amount of damages. On the other hand, the owner of an ox that eats or tramples the property of another in the public domain is exempt from paying damages. Continuing this Mishnah, so the Mishnah elaborates, for what damage caused with the hoof, right, this refers to trampling, is the animal deemed forewarned, right? We don't have to have seen that the animal trampled somebody's property a previous time. The owner is considered forewarned. Now, for what kind of damage that is caused with the hoof is the animal deemed forewarned? It is deemed forewarned with regard to trampling objects and breaking them in the course of its walking. An animal is deemed forewarned with regard to walking in its typical manner, and by doing so, breaking objects as it proceeds. Now, by contrast, if the animal was kicking while it was walking, or it transpired that pebbles were inadvertently propelled from under its feet, and those pebbles broke vessels, well, cases of that kind do not fit precisely into the primary category of trampling. In both of these cases, the owner of the animal pays half the cost of the damage. If an animal trod upon a vessel and broke it, and then a shard of that vessel fell upon a second vessel and broke it, the owner pays the full cost of the damage for the first vessel, that's trampling. The owner pays the full cost of the damage for the first vessel, as its action is classified under the primary category of trampling. And he pays half the cost of the damage for the second vessel, as the damage caused by the shard is tantamount to damage caused by pebbles inadvertently propelled by the foot of an animal, right? We're sort of removed one level of direct cause and effect. Now, chickens are deemed forewarned with regard to walking in their typical manner and breaking objects. And therefore, the owner of a chicken pays the full restitution for the damage done to any objects broken by his chicken. If there was a string delil tied to a chicken's leg as an indication of ownership, and the string wrapped around the vessel and broke it, or if the chicken was hopping in an atypical manner and breaking vessels, then its owner pays half the cost of the damage because it's considered indirect. That's the Mishnah, first Mishnah of chapter 2. Here, now we're on page 17b with the Gemara on the first Mishnah of chapter 2. Now, the Gemara analyzes the Mishnah. Ravina said to Rava, in the context of the category of trampling, damage caused by an animal trampling an object with its foot is the same as damage caused by an animal breaking an object with its body. Why does the Mishnah repeat the same law twice? And Rava said to him, well, first the Tana teaches the primary categories of damage, namely the category of trampling with an animal's foot, which is mentioned explicitly in the written Torah. And then he teaches the subcategories of those primary categories, i.e., the animal is deemed forewarned with regard to causing damage with other parts of his body in the course of walking, right? It brushed by something as it walked by. That's the same as trampling, even though it didn't happen under the hoof. Ravina challenges this explanation. If that is so, the latter clause of the Mishnah on page 19b, which teaches concerning the primary category of eating, for what damage caused by eating is the animal deemed forewarned? It is deemed forewarned with regard to eating food items fit for its consumption, i.e., the animal is deemed forewarned with regard to eating fruits and vegetables. So Ravina asks, well, what primary categories and what subcategories are there in that context? No subcategories of eating are enumerated there in that Mishnah on page 19, and nevertheless the phrase, the animal is deemed forewarned, is repeated. So Rava responded to Ravina with a humorous response and said to him, well, I resolved the difficulty in one Mishnah, now you resolve the difficulty in the other. And what is the reason for the apparent redundancy in that Mishnah with regard to eating? And Rav Ashi said, well, first the Tana teaches the law of eating by an undomesticated animal, and then he teaches the law of eating by a domesticated animal. And it was necessary to state both. As if it enters your mind to say that since it is written, and he sets his animals loose, Exodus 22:4, with regard to domesticated animals, yes, the primary category of eating applies, but with regard to undomesticated animals, no, the primary category of eating does not apply. You might think that. Therefore, the Tana teaches us that undomesticated animals are included in the category of domesticated animals in this regard, and the owner of an undomesticated animal is liable for damage caused by his animal eating another person's produce. And the Gemara asks, well, if so, the Tana should have taught the law with regard to domesticated animal first, and only afterward taught the law with regard to an undomesticated animal, as the latter is included in the category of the former. So the Gemara answers, on the contrary, that law, which is derived from an interpretation, is dear to him. And therefore, the Tana, the rabbi of this Mishnah, preferred to begin with the derived law and only then proceed to the explicit law. Now, that's pretty typical in the Talmud, right? That we start with the more complicated law, which is more a subject of interpretation, more a subject to debate and argument, and only later come to the more basic and more well agreed upon laws. Why? Because the earlier one is more interesting, and they're going to spend, their energy on that. Now the Gemara asks, if so, then with regard to the first clause in this Mishnah, also let the Tana teach that which is not explicitly written first, as that which is derived from an interpretation is dear to him. And the Gemara distinguishes between the cases. How can they be compared? There, with regard to eating, which we're going to come to in our next Mishnah, this damage caused by a domesticated animal and that damage caused by an undomesticated animal are primary categories of damage. Therefore, the Tana taught first that law, which is derived from an interpretation, which is dear to him. But here, with regard to trampling, would he leave aside the primary category of trampling, done with the animal's foot, and then teach a subcategory first, which is, how the animal could damage vessels by walking past them and just, brushing against them, knocking them off a shelf with its side? And if you wish, say instead that the reason that in this Mishnah the Tana begins with that which is written explicitly in the Torah and only then proceeds to teach that which is derived, whereas in the next Mishnah he starts with the derivation and then goes to what's explicit, you could say as follows: since the Tana concluded the discussion in the final Mishnah of the previous chapter that was written on page 15b with the primary category of trampling by teaching the clause, the foot of an animal is deemed forewarned with regard to trampling objects and breaking them in the course of its walking. Therefore, he began the first Mishnah, the second chapter, with the primary category of trampling. Now, the sages taught an animal is deemed forewarned with regard to walking in its typical manner, and while doing so, breaking objects in the course of its walking. How so? If an animal entered into the courtyard of the injured party and it damaged an object with its body in the course of its walking, or if it caused damage with its hair in the course of its walking, or with the saddle that is on it, or with the packed saddle bag that is on it, or with the halter in its mouth, or with the bell around its neck, or if it was a donkey that caused damage with its burden. In all of these cases, the owner pays the full cost of the damage. Why? Because it's like trampling, and it happened in the domain of the injured party. Sumakos says, in the case of pebbles propelled by an animal in the course of its walking, or in the case of a pig that was burrowing in a garbage heap and caused damage, the owner of the animal pays the full cost of the damage. Now the Gemara asks, if a pig caused damage, it is obvious that its owner must pay the full cost of the damage. What novel element is Sumakos introducing? And the Gemara answers, rather say, if it propelled pebbles and thereby caused damage, the owner pays the full cost of the damage. Whereas we've said that pebbles usually only leads to liability for half the damage. Now the Gemara asks, pebbles. Who mentioned anything about pebbles? And the Gemara answers, the Baraisa is incomplete, and this is what it is teaching. For damage caused by pebbles that were propelled by animals walking in their typical manner, the owner pays half the cost of the damage. And for damage caused by a pig that was burrowing in a garbage heap and propelled pebbles and that damaged an object, its owner pays half the cost of the damage. Sumakos says, both in the case of pebbles that were propelled and in the case of a pig that was burrowing in the garbage heap and propelled pebbles and damaged an object, the owner pays the full cost of the damage. Sumakos does not accept the law that the owner pays only half the cost of the damage caused by pebbles inadvertently propelled by the foot of an animal in the course of its walking, i.e. in its typical manner. Why? Because he holds that since the damage results from the animal's typical behavior, the owner pays the full cost of the damage. In other words, Sumakos considers that whether the animal walked on the vessels and broke them, or brushed them with its side and broke them as it walked by, or brushed them and broke them because of the load it was carrying, or the bell around the neck, or the halter, or anything like that, it's full cost of damages. And if the animal propelled pebbles and broke a vessel, to Sumakos, it's the same as breaking with its burden or its halter. It doesn't matter that it propelled the pebbles and it seems a little less direct. For Sumakos, it's the same. The animal just caused that damage in the regular course of walking, and it should come under trampling, and the owner be liable for the full cost. But Sumakos was in the minority when it comes to pebbles. The sages, the majority, overruled him on that. Now, the sages taught Tosefta 2:1. If chickens were flying from place to place and broke vessels with their wings, their owner pays the full cost of the damage, as this is a subcategory of trampling. By contrast, if the damage was caused by the wind generated by their wings, the owner pays half the cost of the damage in accordance with the law in the case of pebbles. And Sumakos says the owner pays the full cost of the damage. It is taught in another Baraisa, if chickens were hopping upon dough or upon produce and they sullied it with their feet, or if they pecked at it and caused damage, their owner pays the full cost of the damage. If in the course of their hopping they stirred up dust or propelled pebbles, the owner pays half the cost of the damage, and Sumakos says he pays the full cost. So the majority and Sumakos are quite consistent that even though it was in the course of walking, if there was an indirect cause because some object was stirred up by the animal and that's what caused the damage, the majority, the rabbis say then you pay only half the damage, and Sumakos says you would pay the full. It is taught in another Baraisa, if a chicken was flying from place to place and wind emerged from beneath its wings and the wind caused vessels to break, the owner pays half the cost of the damage. And the Gemara notes this unattributed Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Sumakos and hold that the owner pays half the cost of the damage in these cases, just as he does in the case of pebbles propelled by the feet of the animal. Rava analyzed the Baraisa and said, granted, the opinion of Sumakos is understood, as he holds that the status of damage resulting from a force generated by the animal's action is like that of damage directly caused by the animal itself, and therefore the owner pays the full cost of the damages in both cases. But the opinion of the rabbis is difficult, says Rava, as if they hold that the status of damage resulting from a force generated by the animal's actions is like that of damage directly caused by the animal itself, the owner should be required to pay the full cost of the damage. And if they hold that the status of damage resulting from a force generated by the animal's action is not like that of damage directly caused by the animal itself and is not attributed to the animal, then the owner should not be required to pay even half the cost of the damage. If there's this intermediate object that's being propelled by the feet of the animal, why are we saying the owner of the animal has to pay half the damage? This was an intervening force, right? These pebbles, who knows where they were going to end up. Why should the owner have to pay for half the cost of the damage? It's just bad luck for the injured party. Then Rava said, actually, the rabbis hold that the status of damage resulting from a force generated by the animal's action is like that of damage directly caused by the animal itself, and in principle, the owner should be required to pay the full cost of the damage. And the liability to pay for only half the cost of the damage caused by the pebbles, why did the rabbis say you only owe half? It is because the rabbis learned this law, this halacha, through tradition, and it does not correspond to the standard halachas of damages. Right? There is no good philosophical reasoning for this pay only half damages when there's some kind of intervening object between the animals walking and the damage that is caused. It's just that this was learned as a tradition, presumably given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai and passed down through the generations. Rava says, I'm almost done. Questions or comments? Please get them in. Rava says, with regard to any type of action which, when a zav, right, so a zav is a man who has experienced certain kinds of nocturnal emissions, and he is a source of tuma, ritual impurity. So when a zav interacts with a vessel in that manner, Rava says, with regard to any type of action which, when a zav interacts with a vessel in that manner, he renders it ritually impure. If the same type of action was done by an animal, resulting in damage, the owner of the animal is liable to pay the full cost of the damage. So let's learn a little bit about a zav. A zav is a man suffering from a condition similar to gonorrhea. And the laws relating to the severe ritual impurity caused by this condition appear in Leviticus and are enumerated in Tractate Zavim. Now, the zav becomes ritually impure as a result of the secretion of a white pus-like discharge from his member. And a man who experiences one discharge of that kind on one occasion becomes ritually impure for one day, similar to one who experienced a seminal emission. If he experiences a second discharge on the same day or on the following day, or if he experiences a prolonged initial discharge, he contracts the more severe ritual impurity of zav, which lasts 7 days. A third discharge experienced on the second or third day obligates him to bring a sacrifice as part of his purification process. Now, what they're talking about, the kind of action is that a zav can impart impurity not just by touching something, but also by sitting on it. And that's what they're comparing here. So, where was I? Pay the full cost. Now, conversely, with regard to any type of action which, when a zav interacts with a vessel in that manner, he leaves it ritually pure. For example, where the contact is indirect, if the same type of action was done by an animal resulting in damage, the owner of the animal is liable to pay only half the cost of the damage. And the Gemara asks, and Rava, did he come to teach us the law of pebbles? The substance of Rava's comment is that for the damage caused by the indirect action of an animal, its owner pays half the cost of the damage. And that is identical to the law of pebbles articulated in the Baraisas cited earlier. So the Gemara answers, no. Rava teaches us the law in the case of a calf pulling a cart, a karon. So just as with regard to a zav, the status of a vessel that a zav moves is like that of a vessel with which he came into contact. But that's what's important about the zav, that even though he doesn't touch something, if he causes it to move, like, for example, he picks up an object even though he's holding, like several rags between his hands and the object, so he never touches it, but he causes it to move, so he imparts tuma, he imparts ritual impurity to that object. And that's going to be similar to this law here, right? So just as the law of the case of a calf pulling a cart. So just like as with regard to a zav, the status of a vessel that the zav moves is like that of a vessel with which he came into contact, so too the status of damage caused by the cart pulled by the animal is like that of damage caused by the animal's body. And it is not considered indirect damage like in the case of pebbles. That's very interesting, right? So your ox is pulling your cart. And as it pulls the cart through an area, the cart is what causes damage. that we could say is akin to trampling. And you might say, well, wait a minute. Trampling is what the ox does. The ox didn't touch anything that got damaged, only the cart that the ox was pulling. Answer: the cart that the ox was pulling is considered part of the ox for the law of trampling. It is taught and not like pebbles. Now, finally, it is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rava. An animal is deemed forewarned with regard to breaking objects in the course of its walking. How so? If an animal entered into the courtyard of the injured party and it damaged an object with its body in the course of its walking, or with its hair in the course of its walking, or with a saddle on it, or with the pack saddlebag that is on it, or with the halter that is in its mouth, or with the bell that is around its neck, or if a donkey caused damage with its burden, or if a calf caused damage while pulling a cart, in all these cases, the owner pays the full cost of the damage. Very similar to the cart being pulled by the ox. That's what I've got for us today. Let's check if we've got some questions. So interesting. So Sharon says, generally, Tom in Hebrew is simple or plain. How do we come by the term innocuous? I think simple, in other words, and Yaakov was called a Tom, right? Yaakov was called a Tom, a wholesome man who dwelled in tents, as opposed to Esau, who was much a man of the field and a hunter, but also somebody who was, incredibly driven by his tastes, right? Like by his hungers, by his appetites. That's why he traded his whole birthright and spurned God. This is actually considered a form of cursing God's name, that he was not interested in the birthright as the firstborn of Isaac and traded it away, for a bowl of soup, right? Because he was hungry at that moment, and what he cared about is just what was in front of him. As opposed to him, Jacob was considered a Tom. So the Tom has this sense of one who is simple and pure from sin, right? And pure from its desires, and simple in the sense that it is pure, I would say. And so the ox, which has not caused damage, has not gored, is not prone, is not wont, to go after people and animals with its horns, is considered a simple, innocent, pure ox who is not, vicious, like the habitual gorer, right? Bill, I think we sort of have to read such prayers as what they are: the cry of great pain from a soul pressed hard, turning to God, who alone might understand the pain. One of the great strengths of the book of Psalms, for instance, is how many of the Psalms are full of this sort of language. In this way, the Psalms cover the whole breadth of human experience, from the heights of joy and the depths of sorrow and anger and back again. Couldn't agree more. And I think that's why, we read Psalms, like right now, right? We've added Psalms 121 and 130. A lot of people sang several other Psalms during this time of tremendous distress. Other times, we sing Hallel, and that's a series of Psalms from 113 to 118, which really express our joy. But many of them were written by David. All of them were collected by David. And this idea, that's exactly right. They cover the whole breadth of human experience, our highest highs and our lowest lows. And we want to connect with God with regard to all of it. Our greatest sadnesses and our greatest joys, our greatest distress, our greatest stress, and our greatest thanksgiving. Joseph says in Rambam's Mishna Torah, Foundation of the Torah, says this as well, that the study of Torah inspires awe and thus Torah observance and fulfillment of mitzvahs. Good. And Sharon, I guess, answers, but Isaiah stresses the need for action with intention. Look at the Haftorah for Yom Kippur, for example. Is this the fast I choose? Tzidkiyahu, for example, is of little consequence if only studied Rambam's ladder of tzedakah, does not have a rung for study of tzedakah, but only for how that mitzvah is carried out. I mean, I think, this debate is somewhat intellectual, right? We're asking the question, which is greater, Torah or mitzvahs? And then a third sort of category is acts of chesed, acts of loving kindness. But the idea that Torah is greater than all of them or equivalent to all of them, equivalent to all the mitzvahs. Why? Because Torah leads one to become a more righteous person, a more holy person, a more pious person, a person who's more prone to fulfill the mitzvahs and to fulfill them properly, a person who's more prone to commit acts of loving kindness, a person who's more prone to give charity and to give more than is expected. And I think a very simple example is if you ask people, do you give to charity? And almost all people say, of course. And then you say, do you think you give enough? And they'll say, oh, yeah, I'm generous. I definitely give. But if you're not giving meiser, right? If you're not consciously setting aside 10% of your net income, odds are you're not going to get there, right? If people will definitely overestimate their own generosity. Every now and then, right, they release the tax returns of famous people. And then the public says, wow, they don't give away a lot of charity at all. They give 1%, 2%. To actually give 10% of all your net income, it's a lot. And it only happens because you say, oh, well, I am obligated to do this. I'm going to be a pious person. And I'm going to be meticulous and keep track of all my net income as it comes in. The best way is not to add it up at the end of the year, but rather as it comes in, immediately when something hits your account, take 10% of it and put it in your giving account. Then now everything in your giving account is there for the purpose of giving to charity. Right? And I think that's an example where a person's only going to do that because they're becoming more elevated, because they see how important Meiser is and how you do it, and what an important part of life it is. And that's just one example. But you would hope, that if you spend a lot of time studying Torah, right, you're going to be moved by your study. You're going to be moved by what you're learning and have a desire to fulfill more of your obligations or fulfill your obligations in a higher way than if you didn't study all that Torah. And the answer is, it's not just that we would think, that's what happens, right? That's what happens. Studying Torah is good for a person. It elevates them and leads them to fulfill more. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Monday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.